Let's talk now to Captain Bish Johnson, a security expert and retired U.S. Army captain. He's also a national defense and military strategist. He joins us from our Abuja studios. Captain Johnson, thank you for your time. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Let's look at the situation on the ground there. There might be a pause to the supply of British weapons that we've been reporting, especially if, as we hear, Boris Johnson facing a vote of confidence later on today. If he loses that vote of confidence, there might be a pause, not necessarily a halt, but a pause to the supply of those weapons. But do you think that the Russians will carry out the threat to take on new targets if the West, and by that I'm sure they mean the U.S. and Britain, begin to supply Ukraine with heavy weapons?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for having me. Yes, there's a possibility that the Russians may carry out their threat should the U.S. and its Western allies continue to supply, particularly weapons with long range that are capable of reaching the territory of Russia. So far, the West have resisted every attempt in supplying such weapons to the Ukrainians. But if the Russians feels that the kind of weapons, heavy weaponry that is being supplied to the Ukrainians, we have the capability of getting to that territory, there's a possibility that they may make good on the threat that they have so far been threatening the West and the U.S.
Before we come to your role as a national defense and security strategist, I want to talk to you now in your role as a soldier. And on the ground, you have the Russians, you have the Ukrainians. 14 weeks now, this war has been going on more than 100 days. And there are people who are saying that, look, there is no advantage to anyone anymore. In the first few weeks, there might have been advantages on one side or the other, but there are no advantages. And the people bearing the brunt are the soldiers on the ground in Ukraine. From your experience as a soldier, would you consider that to be a fair comment?
Would I consider that to be a what?
A fair comment, a fair comment. Would you consider it to be true?
Yes. Yeah, sure. It is a fair comment. Look, there is no usually easy way out to this kind of crisis. And most of the time, these kind of problems are not resolved through military actions. They are usually resolved through diplomatic solutions. And even with the military actions, what they are doing with the military actions is to try to gain some kind of advantage that will allow them to present some conditions eventually when they go to negotiating table. Because at the end of the day, this crisis will have to be resolved at the negotiating table. There is no easy way out of it. Military solution is not the way out of it. They must eventually come back to the negotiating table and negotiate on how to end this. If that doesn't happen, I don't see this thing ending anytime soon. It's going to be a very protracted war. The Ukrainians' capacities has been boosted by NATO, with other European countries, and so their capacity to match Russia is there. However, Russia, of course, as we know, is the second most powerful military in the world, so they still have a whole bunch of arsenals to continue this war. So if no diplomatic solution is sought now, I fear that this war is going to be a very protracted war, and those who are suffering will continue to suffer. The ordinary people, the soldiers, and their families will continue to suffer.
Let us look at what you just said now, at least from a national security and defense strategy. The Russians at the start said that, look, it was important for them to do this because they still needed a buffer against NATO and the EU countries in terms of defense. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, said that, look, they're a sovereign country and that they expect to be able to take decisions that suit them. And that was what led to this protracted conflict, as it were, right now. Now, you talk about the fact that, look, this is not going to be resolved unless there's peace and there's negotiations and so on. But do you see either side being willing to make the concessions? French President Emmanuel Macron was carpeted yesterday because he suggested that, you know, there might be need to offer the Russians some concessions. Everybody jumped at him because he said that. The other day, there was the suggestion that perhaps some territorial considerations for peace could be brought on the table. But it seems as if the positions have hardened on either side, and therefore what you want or what you think is feasible in terms of peace talks are not going to happen.
Well, that is the whole essence of the war in the first place. The essence of the war in the first place is to give them some kind of advantage and leverage when they do go to negotiating table. You don't want to go to the negotiating table from a very weak position, because if you do, you're going to get less. So, but at the end of the day, there will have to be some concessions made on both parties. Because if there is no such concession made on both from either party, the war will continue. And I don't think that the war is in the best interest of either Russians or the Ukrainians or even the West. So I think at the end of the day, concessions will be made. What the concessions are going to be is what I cannot tell you. But at the end of the day, there will be compromises if this war is going to come to an end. But if neither of them is ready to compromise, which I don't see them compromising right now, because until they fight to the point that both parties are weakened, there will be no incentive for them to go to the negotiating table. So yeah, at the end of the day, there will be some concessions. What it will be, I don't know.
Outside forces will play a role in that, won't they? Already Turkey has indicated that it's willing to host those kind of talks. It had hosted some before, and that it's willing to host again. President Erdogan is still on good terms with Russia and is still on good terms with the Ukrainians. But then when I mention outside forces, I'm referring to the likes of the United States and Britain in the case of Ukraine, the people who have been supporting Ukraine that you mentioned with arms. And then on the part of Russia, you have China and other such countries in the East who have continued to buy, like India, who have continued to buy Russian oil and all of that. These are people who can play a role in this. But do you see them wanting to play that role?
At the very moment, Turkey seems to be the country that is, foremost making effort in trying to play that role. Yes, outside forces, we have to play that role. There's an adage in Igbo language that when you translate to English says that somebody who fainted does not pour himself water to recover. And so you see that the two parties are going to have to need, outside assistance in helping them to try to come to the negotiating table. But let me say this as well. Sure, the Western countries are already playing a role. China is already playing a role. Turkey is already playing a role. But let me tell you, Africa can play even greater role in trying to bring this crisis to an end. A few days ago, the AU chairman was in Sochi with Russian president, discussing the impact of the war, particularly on Africa, most importantly, sub-Saharan Africa. African countries, since this war began, had taken strategic positions based on their own specific challenges and interests. They've maintained neutral position. They either absconded from voting at the United Nations or absconded from even condemning Russia in this regard. So they are looking at the challenges that the continent faces, which will require them to have, which the challenges are, of course, multiple and requires them to have diversity of partners. So they don't want to align to either with the Russians or the West, because they have maintained that neutrality throughout the course of this crisis. They seem to be the people that have the most integrity to intervene in this crisis. So yeah, sure, outside forces will have to come in. The West is there already playing a role. China is playing a role already, so is India, Turkey. But I think Africans can even play a much greater role in trying to bring this crisis to an end by making that argument that, look, this war is not in the best interest of any of the parties, and that it is even equally affecting neutral parties like African countries.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Captain Bish Johnson, retired U.S. Army Captain, National Defense and Military Strategist. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.